POSCA paint pens. You know them, you'll love them. There's no other like it. Or is there? Sakura recently sent me a package of some goodies, and they also included these Permapaque markers. I'm curious to see how they stack up, especially no pumping or shaking required. Ooh la la. So you know what we have to do. Let's swatch them. Here they are, opening right out of the box, and can we start writing immediately? Whoa, you can. Ooh. If you're wondering why that's so impressive to me, here is a fresh POSCA pen ready to go. You gotta pump that sucker. Now we can use it. Is it a big deal? No, but it's nice not having to do that to a whole set of markers. Okay, let the swatching continue. I gotta say these colors might be a little bit more my vibe. I do love a more earthy toned down color, and as much as I love working with POSCA and working super bright and colorful sometimes, they're definitely different. I swatched the same POSCA colors as closely as I could to the Sakura ones, and they're pretty close. POSCA pens are definitely more bright and vivid, especially. Look at this pink compared to their pink. It's a lot. I want to test things like, are they water soluble? I'm going to give that test a no. How do they layer? They definitely struggled a little bit with smudging, and the white pen, I don't know what's happening. It basically doesn't exist, though to be honest, I had the same issue with POSCA. How do they blend together? Obviously, being able to blend is not something every single art supply out there needs to be able to do. POSCA pens don't, and I love to work with them in different ways using a sort of lined gradient style. It's pretty neat. Same thing with these guys. Do they eat the paper? They definitely don't eat the paper as much as a POSCA pen does. Their tips are a lot smoother. With all of that out of the way, the real test of these markers is actually creating an illustration. So let's get into it. It's winter, Christmas is around the corner, so all I want to do right now is draw holiday related things, and you guys know I absolutely love drawing kitties, so I'm going to be drawing some kitties in holiday themes. Thank you, Ham, for your contribution. In general, I just wanted to get a feel for these markers and how every color works, how opaque they are, streakiness. There is definitely variety when it comes to different colors. Sometimes the darker colors look better. Sometimes the lighter colors show streaks more. So when plating these doodles, I wanted to try to get most of these colors, if not all, used up. So we're starting off with a blue cat, totally normal, with a red Rudolph nose and some antlers on its head. It has been quite a while since I've worked with any sort of paint pen at all. Even POSCA pens I haven't really been touching lately. I feel like when it comes to art supplies, I go through phases. For a few months, I'll be super obsessed with gouache. For a few months, I'll be super obsessed with mixed media. For a few months, I'll be sewing. POSCA probably had its time earlier in the year. It'll come back eventually. That being said, I didn't feel entirely out of practice when using paint markers, but these definitely felt different than POSCA pens for a number of reasons. One of the benefits with POSCA is that they come in such a variety of sizes, and that is very helpful when, for example, as you can see with this cat, maybe you want to fill in a very large area of color. This cat was a very plain flat blue, and filling in that big area of blue was a bit of a struggle with the small fine point of this pen. I looked these markers up. They do come in only 2 different sizes. The ones I am currently using are the fine points, which they say is used for general drawing and detail coverage, and a second marker which has a dual point with a chisel nib for wider coverage and a bullet point for accents and details. POSCA comes in, I want to say 5 or more sizes, though some of them are kind of goofy, like the huge fisted giant marker for graffiti, or the brush pen I absolutely never use. I think this is one of the main reasons why I favor something like watercolor or gouache so much, because you aren't stuck with a pen size. You kind of use a brush, and even with a brush size, you can work smaller or larger with that brush. The constricting size of any marker or pen, it's just not my vibe. All of that to say, with our first doodle, I was starting to get a feel for these markers and how to work with them and how they feel. So let's move on to our second doodle. For this doodle, I wanted to focus more on smaller details and little tiny brush strokes and how small I could work with. If these pens are small, let's see how small we can go. What are the details we can get in here? For the first reindeer doodle, I just wanted to get a feel for the pens, and I learned that they're just not quite as juicy as, I'm sorry to keep comparing them to POSCA, but it's really my main source of reference when it comes to paint markers. Something I both love and hate about POSCA is just how wet and juicy they are. Sure, there are times when your POSCA marker might come out watery, but once you give it a shake, I find them to be really opaque and really wet and juicy. You can even give them a few pumps to get that paint out and sort of move that around, though there are times when it sort of overflows and comes out on its own and you are left with a load of paint. That is definitely a problem you do not have with these markers. I will say I kind of missed just how wet and juicy POSCA pens were. I do not miss how they exploded and were too wet, but these pens I feel like were just wet enough that they made me just want it to be a little wetter. I think it was just so close to being on the edge of dry that it made me constantly worried that the pen was going to be dry. And maybe that's just me being a weird paranoid freak. I don't know. But I did feel a lot more comfortable doing smaller details because I didn't feel like these pens were going to explode. They felt very controlled. There's also times with POSCA pens I feel like the pen sort of stutters and it will splatter paint everywhere, but I also didn't have that issue with these pens. Again, I felt like I had a lot of control with these pens. I didn't feel like they were going to overflow. I didn't feel like they were going to splatter. They felt very in control, and that I really like. Did they eat the paper a little bit, causing the tips of the pens to have some paper pieces that were going awry here and there? Sure, I did have to clean off the tips every once in a while because the paper was accumulating. But honestly, these markers are probably not made for paper, much like POSCA. I think that actually might be the #1 most asked question I get about paint pens, specifically POSCA. What paper should you use? I think at the end of the day, you're not really supposed to use paint pens with paper. With watercolor, the brush is a lot softer and doesn't press down and is rough on the paper. With markers, they're just rough. They tear up the paper. But as an illustrator, paper is just, it's cheaper, it's convenient, it is what it is. But are they worth the struggle? Absolutely. The third and final doodle is my absolute favorite. Is it the goofy cat tree that I love that just looks horrifying with its beady red eyes? Maybe. Or maybe it's the absolutely beautiful green to teal to blue colors. Oh, it's just beautiful. It's beautiful. I love it. For this doodle, I wanted to test the markers a little bit more on what they could do. We've tested them with putting down a flat color, we've done smaller details. It is now time to test a gradient and layers and details and line work. We're gonna put this doodle through the test. Luckily, creating a gradient from green to blue is one of the most, I feel like, easiest gradients out there. It's also easy to use a blue marker to create line work or darker details on top of green. The teal is a nice shading color. Blues and greens are just perfect. I don't know what to tell you guys. If you don't like blue and green, that sucks. Speaking of loving colors, you guys know I have a great dislike for purple. That being said, I use purple for a lot of shading in my art. I know. And using purple to shade brown, which is what I did with the tree trunks, it's just so nice. It's colorful, but it's dark. It creates a nice, fun shade. I layered the wooden legs of this cat tree a lot of times. I definitely overworked the paper quite a bit, but as you can see, it created a nice, darker, colorful shade for the legs, so hey, it worked. I used the teal for an in-between lighter shading. It's what I used to start off to shade this creature. And once I had a base shade down, I went back with the blue and created even darker, dramatic, and also just really colorful shadow on this creature. It's really risky to create a nice gradient with paint pens like this because you do risk overworking the paper, but when you work it when it's still wet, it makes a nice gradient. Look at the tail and the mouth. It is absolutely perfect. I love them. I even used a little bit of purple in the eyes and worked it while it was wet to create even more soft shading. And I love this guy. He's my favorite. These markers definitely have their pros and cons. They are $1 cheaper than POSCA, so if they're something you're interested in trying before going into a more expensive art supply, I would definitely say give these a try. I definitely had fun creating these doodles for sure. Hello and welcome to the end of the video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and an even bigger thank you to my patrons for all of their support. You guys are the best. If you want early access to these videos, secret sketches, live streams, and more, check out the link to my Patreon in the description. Thank you guys so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.